भाई, राम बिना कछु जानत नाही। गुरु कृपांजन पायो मेरे भाई, राम बिना कछु जानत नाही। जागत राम ही सोवत राम ही, जागत राम ही सोवत राम ही। सपने में देखो राजा राम ही, सपने में देखो राजा राम ही। राम ही राम ही, राम ही राम ही, राम ही राम ही, राम ही राम ही। गुरु कृपांजन पायो मेरे भाई, राम बिना कछु जानत नाही। अंतर राम ही, बाहिर राम ही, अंतर राम ही, बाहिर राम ही। जहाँ देखो तहाँ राम ही राम ही, जहाँ देखो तहाँ राम ही राम ही। राम ही राम ही, राम ही राम ही, राम ही राम ही, राम ही राम ही। एका जनार्दने भाव विनीका, एका जनार्दने भाव विनीका। जो देखो सो राम सरीका, जो देखो सो राम सरीका। राम ही राम ही, राम ही राम ही, राम ही राम ही, राम ही राम ही। गुरु कृपांजन पायो मेरे भाई, राम बिना कछु जानत नाही। राम बिना कछु जानत नाही। राम बिना कछु जानत नाही।
Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. This bhajan in the melodious voice of Prem Shila was about seeing and thinking of Rama, an incarnation of God, everywhere, all the time. It started with, in fact, thanks to the grace of the Guru, which was very significant because this type of realization, this type of a constant awareness is impossible without the divine grace, without the grace of the Guru. And that's how it started. And then what is the result that the seeker has experienced? The presence of Rama everywhere, all the time, while sleeping, while awake, and in the dreams, and everywhere and in everybody. So this type of a universal presence and constant awareness is the result. Once Sri Ramakrishna was asked how you can be aware of the divine all the time, there are so many things to do. And he gave a beautiful analogy. He said that suppose you have a toothache, and toothache is one of the most severe pains that human beings can experience. So he said that suppose you have a toothache, you still go about your daily tasks, but then in the background, there's a constant awareness of the pain in the tooth. So that awareness really never disappears. That is the type of awareness that we should live in of the divine also. We should be aware of the divine in the same way, the way one would be if one has a toothache. Today's topic of discussion is the digestive system. And today we'll trace the journey of food from the mouth up to the stomach and go to the intestines in the next session. The very fact that we can eat and digest food is a miracle, and that we can utilize it, a still greater miracle. How little similarity the cereals and pulses and the vegetables that we eat have with the body of which we are made. The fact that we can release the energy that these plants have trapped from sunlight and use that energy for the daily tasks that we go about, and also for other tasks which are invisible, like the beating of the heart, that itself is a miracle. But then some of the food is utilized also for growth and for taking care of wear and tear, which means building up new material, new cells, new tissues of the same type of which we are composed. So that uh, we use it also for that. Now, how little similarity there is between what we eat and our body, and how that material can be converted into our body, is a still greater miracle. And the purpose of it all is to, once again, provide constant conditions, proper conditions for the survival of all cells of the body. And what the digestive system does is to make available the food that all our cells are using all the time, and to ensure that we'll never fall short of food. Although we eat intermittently, it is made available continuously. For that, again, there are beautiful metabolic mechanisms available to the cells all the time. And the main thing that we will focus on in the digestive system is to see how this food that we eat becomes available in the bloodstream for circulating all over the body and meeting all our needs, so that the cells, at least one of the major requirements for the cells, that is to have a constant availability of food, is met satisfactorily. And with that little introduction, I'll go to the slides. The YES course and other uh, activities in the YES project are a part of the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo and the 75th anniversary of India's independence. As in the previous sessions, the anatomical pictures in the presentation have mostly been taken from this excellent book, Tortora and Grabowski, Principles of Anatomy and Physiology, the 10th edition. Let me start with a quote from Mark Twain. To eat is human, to digest is divine. As we were, as I was saying just a few minutes back, the fact that we can eat and digest are in a way both divine, there are, but still, I mean, this is a fair sort of a division. Eating is something that can easily relate to, and we can see that yes, it is I who is eating. Remains somewhat of a mystery to all of us, in spite of all the knowledge that we'll try to get through these sessions. In spite of that, the exactly how it happens and why it happens the way it does remains a mystery. In that sense, digestion is divine. This is a somewhat realistic view of the digestive system, and it starts with the mouth, and then the throat, the as it's called technically, the pharynx and the larynx, and then the food pipe, and the food pipe opens into the stomach, and then the stomach continues into the small intestine, and then continues as the large intestine, and finally the rectum and the anal canal. Closely associated with the digestive system is the liver, and the liver secretes bile along with doing many other things. And the bile secreted here is stored in the gallbladder and conveyed to the initial part of the small intestine. Then there is another extremely important and useful gland, the pancreas, which you might have heard of in relation to diabetes. But apart from secreting insulin, the pancreas also secretes a very large number of digestive enzymes, digestive juices, and that we shall see as we go along. Now, this is a schematic diagram, somewhat easier to understand, of the same thing, the mouth continuing through the throat, and the food pipe, which is technically called the esophagus, and the stomach. Anything related to the stomach we call gastric, and the liver, and the gallbladder. As you can see, it's conveying the bile to the small intestine, and the pancreas also conveys its digestive juice to the small intestine, and the two have a common opening here in the small intestine. It continues uh, about 20 feet of the small intestine packed nicely in the abdomen, and then it continues into the large intestine. Appendix is a remnant of our past, evolutionary past. It has not totally disappeared, but doesn't perform much functions in human beings, except that it causes pain in appendicitis sometimes. Uh, Apart from that, it's considered that it has no function in human beings. And then the large intestine, technically called the colon. The initial part, since it is going upwards, in the ascending colon, the one which is horizontal, the transverse colon, and the descending colon, and then the sigmoid colon because of its somewhat S-shaped appearance, and then the rectum and the anal canal. Now, all spite of all this complexity of the tube, essentially you can see that it is one long tube. So if this body were a cylinder with a hole passing through it, it is this tube which connects the one hole to the other. And therefore, one can see that the food which is in this tube, the gastrointestinal tract or the alimentary tract, essentially still outside the body till it has been transferred across this wall, and it does get transferred after digestion across this wall into the bloodstream. But unless that has happened, whatever goes here can come out here, which means that it can be completely lost. So, although when we eat, we feel that once the food has been put in the mouth, it has entered the body, essentially it is still outside the body, and it requires further processing and transfer across the wall of the intestine to be truly in the interior of the body. Suppose this is the wall of the intestine. Let's see, I mean, how the food that has been digested and food that does not need digestion, how that is transferred to the bloodstream. Like all organs, the intestine also receives blood, and it finally breaks up into very tiny blood vessels, the capillaries across which transfer can take place. And these capillaries in the wall of the intestine digested food, and then the blood that leaves in the venous channels is carrying food. So it enters with very little food, leaves with the food that has picked up from the intestine. And this blood then will eventually get into the general circulation and provide food everywhere in the body. Now, this is a pictorial representation of the process of digestion and absorption. Again, this is the wall of the intestine. And I say, suppose this is a food, and a protein, is made up of a large number of amino acids. So just a few in blocks of different amino acids, they constitute, say, the food protein. Digestion involves breaking it up into individual units. In case of protein, amino acids. And it is these small units which are transferred across the bloodstream. So now in the blood, we have all this available. And suppose these amino acids have to be used for constructing the protein of which we are made. That would be the process utilization. If it is a fuel like glucose, if it is used for getting energy, that will also be a utilization. But here what you can see is that not only the breaking down of the protein into these amino acids by digestion made it easier for it to be transferred to the bloodstream. We can't transfer this whole molecule, but we can transfer these small units. But it also makes it possible to rearrange these amino acids to form the type of protein of which we are made. So the basic raw material, the amino acids remain the same, but the way they are organized is different in our body as compared to the food that we take. The journey of food begins in the mouth when we put it in the mouth. And the first process to which it is exposed is chewing. Chewing is very important. And that's why traditionally we are told to eat the food slowly, chew it properly, chew it 32 times because you have 32 teeth. It may not be exactly 32 that is essential, but that just emphasizes the importance of chewing. What chewing does is to make digestion easier because it breaks into small bits, it increases the surface area that can be exposed to digestive juices. And in fact, while we chew the food, digestion begins in the mouth with the secretion of saliva, which we shall come to in a moment. And if we were to take the food as it is, some of it could damage the delicate linings of the gastrointestinal tract. By chewing it and mixing it with the saliva, while we chew it, that damage is prevented because in the mouth, the lining is much more tough than in the intestines. And then chewing helps in forming a bolus, because for swallowing, it's good to form a nice rounded something, which is bound into the something small and round, which can be swallowed rather than broken fragments. And it prevents overeating. Very important, because it has been seen that irrespective of how much energy the food has, we generally start feeling full after about 20 minutes. After we have been eating for about 20 minutes, we feel full irrespective of how much energy that food has given us. And that is important, because if we eat slowly, naturally we will feel full. After those 20 minutes, we wouldn't have overeaten. And therefore, food which takes longer to chew, takes more effort to eat, is one of the ways in which we can prevent overeating and thereby prevent overweight. Now, this is an inside view of the mouth and the face area, which is relevant to the process of digestion. What it shows is the salivary glands. One of these major salivary glands is the parotid gland in this area, just a little below the ear. And this is the gland that gets swollen in mumps. Then there is another set of another pair of salivary glands along the jawbone. The jawbone is called the mandible, and therefore this is the mandibular salivary gland. And then we have salivary glands under the tongue, sublingual. Sub is under, lingual. So we have these three sets of salivary glands which secrete that watery food as we chew it. And this is a microscopic view of the salivary gland, showing the two types of cells, one which will secrete the watery secretion and the other which will secrete the enzymes. Now, what are the functions of this saliva? Why it is there? Saliva contains an enzyme called amylase. Now, what is an enzyme? An enzyme is something that accelerates the rate of a chemical reaction. So, breaking down starch or fat or protein into their constituent units is a chemical reaction. And to increase the rate at which that happens, these enzymes are helpful. The enzyme itself does not get utilized, but it can accelerate the process. And all enzymes are proteins, and they're named depending upon what type of action they have. Amylum is starch, so amylase breaks down starch. That's why it's called amylase. So in the saliva, we have an enzyme called amylase, which digests starch, which is the major carbohydrate that we eat. So the digestion of starch begins in the mouth because of the saliva, the salivary secretion. The saliva itself contains an enzyme, amylase. And what does it do? It breaks down starch into maltose. Maltose is still not the smallest unit. It will further break down into glucose, but that will happen later in the small intestine. But the process of digestion of starch begins in the mouth. And that is what changes the taste of the food, because starch is tasteless, but maltose is sweet, and that's why the food becomes sweeter as we chew it and as the food mixes with the saliva. Another important function of the saliva is to wash away the sugars, because some salivary secretion continues even when we are not eating, and that keeps washing away whatever sugar is there in the mouth, and that does partly what we do by rinsing the mouth after eating. But then throughout the day also this is going on, so that the sugar and other material which could encourage the growth of bacteria, which in turn may lead to infection of the teeth and the throat, to some extent that function is served by saliva. It contains antibacterial substances like thiocyanate, and also substances which can neutralize a variety of germs, the antibodies. These are different from the circulating antibodies. These are antibodies present in secretions like saliva. These are different, but all the same. They work against the germs in the mouth, these antibodies. And because of these antibacterial constituents of saliva, it makes sense if we are injured somewhere. There's a tendency to lick the wound. And the animals, in fact, do it very regularly. We see them doing it. They immediately start licking the wound, because that then provides that antibacterial dressing or ointment, the natural antibacterial treatment for the wound. Now, how is salivary secretion regulated? That is, how does it increase when we eat and then decrease when we are not eating? The very thought, smell, or sight of food induces salivary secretion, as we know. And that happens because, like all autonomic functions, that is, functions which are not under the control of willpower, this is regulated by the autonomic division of the nervous system, which in turn is further modulated means the activity is increased or decreased by the brain, those areas of the brain which are concerned with emotions and thinking. So the very thought, smell, and sight of a food, particularly a food that is palatable for us, increases the secretion of saliva, and further it increases when the food is actually there in the mouth and we get the taste of the food. And in contrast, the mouth can sometimes dry up. For example, suppose one has to go for an oral examination. Before that, the mouth becomes dry, or in any stressful situation, the mouth becomes dry. That happens because in stress, the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system becomes more active. Parasympathetic is more active when we are at rest and relaxed. Now, eating is a function that is meant for the state in which we are at rest and relaxed, not when we are under stress. An animal will not eat when it is under the stress of being eaten up by, say, a tiger. Say if a deer will not think of food when it is under the threat of being eaten up by a tiger. So that is the time when sympathetic comes into play, and helps the tiger uh, indulge in physical activity, which running, which will help it escape from the tiger. That is not the time to eat. And therefore, all functions associated with the digestion are stimulated by the parasympathetic division, which is more active when we are at rest and relaxed. And they decrease, these functions go down by the action of the sympathetic division, which comes into play when there's an emergency. And for human beings, taking an oral examination sometimes can be that emergency which can dry up the mouth. And this now we can also understand why it is important to eat in a state of peace and not when we are tense. So put yourself at ease and say a prayer so that you're at peace when you are eating. And this is important not only for the digestion to be proper, but also to uh, have the type of accidents which can happen while swallowing the food. Instead of the food going down, it can go towards the respiratory tract and make us cough. That also, again, we shall see a little more in detail a little later. Now, we all heard of crocodile tears. Now, it so happens that in the poor crocodile, the parasympathetic nerve, which supplies the salivary glands, also supplies the lacrimal glands. Lacrimal glands are the tear-producing glands in the eyes. And the result is that when it finds food, like us, that nerve becomes active and the crocodile's mouth also starts watering. But because the same nerve supplies also the tear secreting glands in the eyes also start watering. So when a crocodile finds good food, the very sight of that food not only makes its mouth water, it also makes its eyes water. So in fact, has nothing to do with its being a hypocrite, showing some sort of a kindness or mercy for the creature whom it is going to eat up in a short while. Now let's go to the next stage of swallowing. After we have chewed the food, we swallow it. To start with, swallowing is a voluntary process. That is, we give a little backward push to the food when it is ready to be swallowed. That is a voluntary process. And after that, it becomes totally involuntary. A reflex takes over and makes us swallow the food. So that goes down the food pipe. Now you might say that if the initial push to the back is a voluntary process, we don't have to think about that. That also happens on its own. Yes, it does happen on its own, but there are many voluntary processes also, which if they are done repeatedly, they become so habitual that we don't have to think about them. But all the same, the process is voluntary, as you can imagine or visualize that actually you can toss the food backwards. The way if you have to swallow a pill, you put it on the backside of the mouth from where you know that it will be easily swallowed. After that, the swallowing reflex will take over, but you have to make it reach the back of the mouth yourself. So that is a voluntary action. A good example of voluntary actions which become so habitual that we don't have to think about them are things like, say, cycling. You know, when somebody initially learning cycling, he has to be very careful and he's using a lot of volition, his willpower to be able to stay balanced. But after that, it becomes so habitual that he doesn't have to think about it and can go on talking or doing anything and still the balance is maintained. So voluntary actions can also become habitual like that. So it starts as a voluntary process. The food is tossed back and then swallowed. Now here, there has been shown one important thing, which explains why swallowing is such a complex process. Now we breathe in through the nose, and then the air goes into the windpipe or the trachea. We eat through the mouth, and that goes into the food pipe or the esophagus, which is immediately behind the windpipe. Now, therefore, you can see that in the mouth, there will be a point at which there's a crisscrossing of the pathways And if there's something that goes wrong with it, the air might enter the gastrointestinal tract and the food might enter the windpipe. Now, if the air enters the gastrointestinal tract, it may not do much harm. But if food gets into the windpipe, it will suffocate us and would lead to death. And that is why the process of swallowing has to be complex. But then why did it have to be that way? Why could the divine, which has designed us and has shown so much wisdom, why couldn't it be just like this, that the passage for the air could be behind and the passage for the food could have been in front? Then all this complexity in the process of swallowing would have not been necessary, and never will be there an accident in which the food gets into the respiratory passage. So why has it been designed like this? In fact, there's great wisdom in the way it has been designed, because this makes it possible for us to breathe also through the mouth. All the mouth breathing is not desirable, but it can be life-saving. Suppose the nose is completely blocked, then at least the person can continue living by breathing through the mouth. Because of this arrangement, the person can breathe through the mouth. So it is a life-saving measure. Otherwise, common cold could become a fatal disease. The nose is blocked and the person can't breathe anymore. Now let's see what the process of swallowing is like. Once the food has been tossed back and the reflex takes over, what all happens during that reflex? The first thing is that the food should not come out through the nose. So here is the food. This is the roof of the mouth. And the roof of the mouth in the front is hard and bony, but towards the back it becomes soft. And at the end of this hangs a little protuberance, which we call the uvula. And you can see that if you open the mouth wide open, you can see something hanging in the middle. On either side of it are the tonsils. What happens during swallowing is the reflex, when the reflex takes over, is that the soft palate goes up, it rises up. Since it's soft and muscular, it can contract and it goes up. Now, the result is that food which could have otherwise gone like this and come out through the nose now can't do that. So this prevents the food from coming out through the nose. But then when we are not paying attention and suppose a person starts laughing, then this this mechanism might fail and the person may find water coming out through the nose instead of going down. So that's an accident. So, but if we are eating properly, drinking properly, then this does not happen, because in this reflex, the soft palate rises up, blocking this. But then that is not enough, because the food should not also go down the respiratory tract. This Adam's apple is the outer sort of thing that is visible. Behind it is the larynx, that is the initial part of the respiratory airways. The larynx continues as the trachea. So the food should not go here either. So what all happens to prevent that from happening? At the top of this larynx are these vocal cords. And as you can see, they can move. They can be open and they can be completely closed. And it is the movement of these vocal cords that is an important mechanism for producing sound. That's why they are called vocal. Now, during the act of swallowing, the vocal cords are brought together like this, so that the door that leads to the respiratory passage, that is closed. So if this is closed, this passage is now closed. Though these are the vocal cords, the two vocal cords have closed like a door, with the two flaps. Do palle wala darwaza. So that is now closed, and therefore the food cannot go this way. This door is closed. It can go only this way. But then that is not all. There is a flap here attached to the larynx, the epiglottis. And besides the vocal cords closing, the epiglottis swings back. Back means towards the backside of the person, from the front to the back. As it swings back, it covers the opening. So the door is shut. On top of that, there's another lid. in the form of the epiglottis, double protection. But that is not all. Another thing that happens is that the larynx lifts itself up. The result is that this epiglottis, the lid that was covering it, is no longer straight, it's not horizontal, it is sloping like this. It's sloping backwards so that the food will slip down rather than climb up. So there's a downward slope created because of the lifting up of the larynx. If the whole larynx lifts up, this lid has now a downward slope, and therefore the food will have a tendency to go down like this rather than come this way. And you can all feel, just put your fingers on the larynx and swallow the saliva. You'll see the larynx going up. Now, that is what happens. And that is why the shape of the chin also changes. Now, you see the shape of the chin has changed. The larynx is high. This Adam's apple is hardly visible because it has gone up, and you can feel it's going up, and that creates a slope. So triple protection. The door is shut, there's a lid on the door, and then the lid has been made sloping so that the food will slide down towards the food pipe. And yet another protection, breathing stops momentarily. In any case, the lid is shut, so the air won't be able to enter. But respiratory activity, if you measure the chest movement, even that stops momentarily while we swallow. So here, all these things, have been put together at one place. The soft palate rises so that the food doesn't come out through the nose. Vocal cords are brought together so that the door is shut, door to the respiratory tract is shut. The epiglottis swings back to form a lid over the vocal cords. And the larynx is pulled upwards so that the food has to, it just slides down, there's a slope created, and breathing stops momentarily. Here you have pictorial representation of the whole thing. Not pictorial, actually, more a realistic representation. Here is the food in the mouth, resting on the tongue. The swallowing reflex has not yet begun. Now the person tosses the food backwards, and you can see that this soft palate here has gone up so that now it's not possible to go this way. And the vocal cords are shut. The epiglottis is here, and this thing has gone up, so the shape of the chin has changed, and the food goes down into the food pipe. Now, this explains why it is dangerous to force water down the throat of an unconscious person. In an unconscious person, the swallowing reflex is depressed. And therefore, all these things will not work the way we saw as they do in a conscious person. And therefore, the food, instead of going down the food pipe, the water going down the food pipe may go down the throat and suffocate the person. If the water gets into the respiratory tract, it can lead to death. And that's why, to bring around a person who is unconscious, we should not try to make the person drink some water. That can be dangerous. And not only that, an unconscious person generally falls. And we should not try to make the person sit up or stand, because falling is also a protective response, because it lets the blood flow to the brain continue. If in this unconscious person, we make this person sit up to sort of create an appearance of having become conscious, that can again be fatal. So we should not try to do that. Now the stomach, after the food has been swallowed, it goes down the food pipe, and then at the junction of the food pipe and the stomach is a high pressure zone. High pressure zone means it provides resistance against movement, except when it lets up, it relaxes. And when it relaxes momentarily to let the food go, and then it becomes a high pressure zone again, so that that is closed, and anything which has entered the stomach can't go up. Now let's concentrate on the stomach. The food has been swallowed from the food pipe as a result of the letting up of the pressure in this high pressure zone, the food has now entered the stomach. Okay. And the stomach then continues as the small intestine. And the initial part of this small intestine, the very first part, is the duodenum, which is a C-shaped structure. And we shall see how important that C-shaped structure is, because nestled in this C-shaped structure is the pancreas. And that is where the bile and the pancreatic juice are brought and sent into this initial part of the small intestine. But now our focus will be the stomach right now. Now, what does the stomach do? Firstly, it helps in storing the food, because we eat only a few times in a day. Ideally, we should eat only twice a day. But even if we eat 3, 4, or 5 times, nobody eats continuously. And whereas the supply is needed continuously, to some extent, that is provided, continuous food becomes available because of the storage capacity of the stomach. When the stomach is empty, it is just a fist-shaped and fist-sized structure, not fist-shaped, but fist-sized structure, which hides behind the ribs. When a stomach is really full, after a heavy meal, the stomach can become so big as to reach more or less the bottom of the abdomen, bordering the pelvis. So from a fist-sized structure, it can become a football-sized structure. It can distend. It's a distensible organ. So it can provide, it acts as a storage for food. Then, it is not just stationary. It is something which is moving. And one of the types of movements it performs are mixing the food. Another type of movement is to push the food towards the small intestine. So mixing movements and propelling movements. So the stomach is capable of both these types of movements. It mixes the food. Thirdly, it provides protection, because in the stomach is acid, and that acid can kill many germs. So it provides protection. Before the food gets any further, right in the stomach, one of the sort of crude methods of protection is available in the form of acid. Finer, more sophisticated methods of protection are things like antibodies, etc. But a crude protection in the form of a very strong acid, highly corrosive hydrochloric acid, is available in the stomach. And then, of course, the stomach also initiates, or rather continues further, the process of digestion. Digestion had begun in the mouth with the salivary amylase. It continues in the stomach with another enzyme. Now let's see what happens in the stomach in terms of digestion. The starch digestion, in fact, stops. Why? Because the salivary amylase, which had initiated the carbohydrate digestion, can act only in an alkaline medium. In the stomach, the medium is highly acidic. But protein digestion begins, and the enzyme for digesting protein, which is active in the stomach, is pepsin. Pepsin acts only in the presence of acid, and we can understand why nature has designed it that way. If so many other enzymes can act in an alkaline medium, why pepsin could have also been designed in such a way that it could have been active in an alkaline medium. But acid had to be provided in the stomach to provide us the protection. So then the enzyme which has been designed has also been designed in such a way that it acts only in the presence of acid. And the stomach secretes both acid and pepsin. And pepsin breaks down the proteins into small units called peptides. Not yet amino acids. Amino acids are the final smallest units. So these are smaller, you can say, conglomerates of amino acids, which are called peptides, not as small as the amino acids, but smaller than the protein, which is digested by pepsin. So protein digestion begins here. The proteins are broken down by pepsin in the presence of hydrochloric acid into peptides. Now, how does the stomach know when to secrete the acid and the pepsin and when to stop doing it? It's regulated. Again, thoughts and feelings are important, conveyed by the nerves. And once again, the very thought of food, the sight of food initiates gastric secretion in anticipation of the food. So before the food has actually arrived in the stomach, and there's not a long gap. Once we have started eating, doesn't take long to swallow and the food to reach the stomach. So in anticipation, the stomach also has mechanisms for increasing the gastric secretion. Then once the food has actually reached the stomach, there is a hormone produced in the stomach itself which stimulates secretion. In fact, this hormone gastrin has a double regulation. It is stimulated by the food in the stomach, and it's also regulated by parasympathetic nerves, which would again be affected by thoughts and feelings, which becomes more active in a state of rest and relaxation. So gastrin is stimulated both by the food, presence of food in the stomach, and by these nerves, which means thoughts and feelings would also start working on gastrin and stimulate gastric secretion. And on the other hand, when the food has left the stomach and entered the small intestine, that is a time when gradually the secretion of the gastric juice should stop, so that it is no longer secreted when it is not needed. And for that, there are again a large number of hormones produced in the small intestine, which we'll come to again when we go to the intestinal digestion, secretin, cholecystokinin, etc. There are hormones produced in the small intestine which do a double job. Help in the secretion of those enzymes which will help in the digestion in the small intestine, and at the same time inhibit gastric secretion. So double duty. Food has entered the small intestine, so digestion is required here. So these hormones will increase the secretion of the juices which reach the small intestine, and they also help in switching off the gastric secretion. So profound wisdom packed in there, once again, as you can see. And of course, in general, parasympathetic activation stimulates secretion through multiple mechanisms, including gastrin. A lot about the regulation of gastric secretion was learned from two remarkable patients, one of whom was Alex St. Martin, a Canadian, who got shot in the stomach and got a hole in the stomach. He didn't want to undergo surgery, and he let that hole heal naturally. The result was that the wound did heal, but during the healing, what happened was that the stomach got fused with the skin overlying the stomach, and then this inside of the stomach folded itself up in such a way that the opening was more or less closed and became like a valve. You push your finger through that hole, that flap would move, and then you could put food there. So you could put food directly in the stomach. And then somehow he went to a doctor, maybe not for this, because this is something he had learned to do on his own. He didn't want surgery and he didn't like doctors very much. But then all the same, he managed to reach Dr. William Beaumont. And Dr. William Beaumont saw in this an opportunity to study the secretion of the gastric juice. And he somehow got the cooperation of this patient. And he would put crumbs of bread in the stomach, and he could actually see the acid being secreted. So he learned quite a bit about food and emotional states, how they affect the gastric secretion. Alexis St. Martin lived to be nearly 80 and produced 17 children. He got married after getting this gunshot wound. So after getting this injury, he got married, got 17 children, lived to the age of about 80, and outlived his doctor, Dr. Beaumont, by 25 years. He lived longer than the doctor. Another interesting story is that of a patient generally called Tom Little, because his story started at the age of 9. When he was 9-year-old, probably didn't belong to a very affluent family, rather he belonged to a poor family. So his father had been offered a large amount of some hot steaming soup by a neighbor. And what his father did was, because no other utensil was available, he collected this soup in a pail in which they normally used to keep chilled beer. So Tom Little, 9-year-old, after playing came and couldn't resist the temptation to have a little chilled beer. But then today, instead of beer, it had that steaming hot soup. So, but in a hurry, assuming that it is chilled beer, he put it in his mouth, found it very hot, but didn't spit it because he was afraid of his parents and just forced himself to swallow it. The result was that the food pipe, the esophagus, literally got burnt. And when it healed with a scar. And scar tissues can shrink. So the result was that the food pipe collapsed and the food could not go down his food pipe. So what the doctors did was to make an opening in his stomach. And the food could be put directly there, as in the case of that person who had a gunshot wound. So what Tom learned was to put the food in the mouth, chew it so that he could get the psychological satisfaction of eating and the taste. Then he would take out that food from the mouth, the chewn food, and then put it directly into the stomach. So once again, these two doctors, Doctors Wolf and Wolf, one of them actually had the spelling of a wolf, another one had a double F and an E following that. But anyway, these two doctors then studied on him. And these stories are about 100 years apart. Alexis St. Martin's story was in the 19th century. This was early 20th century. So the techniques were more advanced by then. And once again, they studied on this person how gastric secretion is regulated, because they could directly see, before the days of endoscopies and all, the inside of the stomach and its response to food, its response to being angry, its response to being relaxed, and so on and so forth. So a lot of what we learned initially about the secretion of regulation of the gastric secretion was because of these two patients who came in contact with doctors who were alert enough, who had minds prepared enough to make these observations. Because opportunities may come, but still we need a prepared mind to make use of the opportunity. So that's true not only of the spiritual path, where we have opportunities available in life throughout, yet few of us make really good use of those opportunities. That happens also in science. It is only the prepared mind that uses the opportunities for generating new knowledge. Now, we learned why the acid is produced, but then can this cause damage to the stomach itself or any other parts? Yes, it does cause damage in the food pipe if this acid enters the food pipe. We saw there's a high pressure zone there, which prevents the acid from entering the food pipe. It opens only for a split second to let the food in, but doesn't let the contents of the stomach go up. But there's something that can go wrong with this. And when it does, acid enters the food pipe, leads to an inflammation there. And that is what is responsible for what is called heartburn. It can also damage the stomach or the duodenum. And this happens if the acid production is more than normal or if the protective mechanisms are weak. So it's basically an imbalance between the amount of acid produced, the time at which it is produced. If it's produced at the wrong time, such as when the food is not there in the stomach, and if the protective mechanisms are weak. And there are multiple protective mechanisms. The mucus lining the stomach, some chemicals produced by the stomach like prostaglandins, and the fact that the cells of the stomach lining are such that they are very resistant to anything passing through them. And several other mechanisms have been discovered which protect the stomach. But these protective mechanisms, like anything in the body, are not equally good in everybody. So some people may have an imbalance, too much of acid produced, and weak protection. And it's the imbalance of the two that can lead to damage in the stomach or the part of the small intestine that immediately follows the stomach. And the causes of peptic ulcer, which includes both these types of ulcers, the damages can lead to an ulcer in the stomach or in the duodenum. That's a crater-like thing, it's a pit-like thing. That's an ulcer. And it can be a gastric ulcer or a duodenal ulcer. Gastric in the stomach, duodenal in the duodenum. Both these types of together, the gastric ulcer and the duodenal ulcer together are called peptic ulcers. And the cause of this has been summed up in these three rhyming words: hurry, worry, and curry. Hurry, being under stress because of trying to do too much in too little time. Very often, those who get a peptic ulcer are people who have what is called a type A personality. That is ambitious, high-strung, multitaskers. This is one of the characteristics. But at least in the case of heart disease, I'm sure it applies also to peptic ulcer. Uh, it's not just these characteristics of these people who have this type A personality that leads to disease. In case of heart disease, it has been brought out very clearly that it is not the ambitious nature of these people or the fact that they work too hard, they are multitasking. It is not that leads to heart disease. The single most important predictor of this is another characteristic, which also is quite common in such people, and that is cynicism and hostility. So these negativities are correlated much better with disease than just being ambitious and hardworking. So hurry, worry, chronic stress. Stress about what happened in the past, stress about what one is going through now, and stress about what might happen 10 years later. So all types of worries. And curry refers to diet in general. For example, heartburn, reflux esophagitis, it is called. That is reflux that's going back in the wrong direction. Esophagitis, inflammation of the esophagus or the food pipe. That is what causes heartburn. So wrong type of food, too much tea, alcohol, chocolate. These are some of the foods commonly associated with heartburn. Somewhat similar, somewhat different, but again, smoking, alcohol, tea, chilies, low fiber diets. These are some of the things associated with peptic ulcer. What is gastritis? Gastritis, one might say, is the beginning of a peptic ulcer. It may or may not go to a peptic ulcer in everybody. It is the inflammation of the stomach. And again, it's because of the acid damage produced by the acid, imbalance between the acid and the protective mechanisms. Both are important because it's not that those who do not have gastritis forget about peptic ulcer. Those who go about as in perfect health, they secrete no acid between meals. That's not true, because it has been found that many people who are apparently healthy secrete about half as much acid even between meals as compared to what they secrete during meals. So their peak acid output is only about double their basal acid output. That is, the acid that they are producing even when they are not eating is about half as much as they produce when they eat and they reach their peak acid output, which means that acid alone is not important. Other factors, including the protective mechanisms, which are also affected by psychological factors, these could also be important. Another thing that has been associated with peptic ulcer and gastritis and things like that is the presence of a germ called Helicobacter pylori. So that germ also seems to contribute to this. So there are multiple factors which lead to gastritis, and gastritis continued too long and becoming more severe can sometimes, in some people, lead to an ulcer, a peptic ulcer. Do some drugs also increase acid production and increase the possibility of gastritis, bleeding in the stomach, formation of an ulcer? The most important among this are painkillers, particularly aspirin. And the painkiller that is least likely to increase acidity is paracetamol, commonly sold as Crocin. So paracetamol is the safest, of the worst when it comes to acid production. But then in general, it's better to avoid painkillers for various reasons, not only for the stomach, but also for the kidneys and other organs which they could damage. So one should avoid painkillers as much as possible. And you might also see, more or less as a routine, something which will reduce the production of acid in the stomach is also prescribed routinely along with painkillers for the same reason. Now, that then from there we can go to what are the types of things that doctors prescribe when there's too much acid production or any damage because of acid production, or what they prescribe along with the painkillers. What are the types of drugs? The most primitive ones are those which directly counteract the acid. Things like gelucin. More advanced, things which came later are those which block the action of one of the mediators of acid production in the stomach, which is histamine. So what they do is they block those receptors of histamine, those they block the action of histamine in the stomach. Those are drugs like ranitidine. And then came another generation of drugs which directly inhibit the acid producing cells in the stomach so that they produce less acid. In that categories are things like omeprazole and its close cousins. So these are the three major categories of drugs which are used for excess acid, for dealing with excessive acid, be it because of painkillers or be it otherwise in gastritis or peptic ulcer. And of course, why acid at all? We saw because of the protection that it provides us, and that's why perhaps nature has provided the strong corrosive acid in the stomach. But of course, along with that, also enough defense mechanisms for it not to damage our food pipe or the stomach or the duodenum. And that's why most of us, in fact, can go about, in spite of the strong acid, for several decades in life without getting into any trouble. Now, how long does the food stay in the stomach? As a rule of the thumb, 4 hours. But it is like saying, what is the normal heart rate? 72 per minute. Whereas if you take your pulse, you find that rarely is it exactly 72. It could be 60, it could be 70, it could be 80, and sometimes it could be even 90 or 100. So the food also stays for a variable period of time in the stomach. And what is it that can slow down gastric emptying? Mainly one is dietary fiber and another is dietary fat. Dietary fiber, is the indigestible, that is that component of diet which cannot be digested, but it has an important function. While it is in the stomach, it can absorb water, that is soak water, swell up and form a viscous mass. And this viscous mass moves slower than food which has low fiber. And another component in the diet, particularly fat. In fact, diet in general slows down gastric emptying, but dietary fat slows it down more efficiently than carbohydrate or protein. And that's why you find that if you take a high-fat meal, after that you don't feel hungry for a long time. So fat slows down gastric emptying. Why are we concentrating on gastric emptying? Why should we want to slow it down at all? Firstly, it prevents overeating because we will not feel full. And secondly, it helps in prevention and treatment of diabetes. Because if the stomach empties slowly, it will send food to the small intestine slowly. If the food goes to the small intestine slowly, the glucose that will be produced as a result of the digestion of carbohydrates, that will be released slowly into the bloodstream. And if the glucose is sent slowly into the bloodstream, the same amount of glucose spread out over a long period of time, that is entering the bloodstream slowly, then the insulin secretion required will be less. At a time, we will not require too much insulin. And therefore, a tired pancreas, a pancreas which is not at its peak capacity, will also be able to produce enough insulin to cope with that slow influx, that slow flowing in of glucose from the small intestines into the bloodstream. So the action can start right in the stomach. If you send the food slowly into the small intestine, glucose enters the blood slower. And that is best achieved not by a high-fat meal, but by a high-fiber meal. High-fiber means, then what do we eat for that? Whole grains instead of refined grains. Whole grains means wheat, brown bread, chapati made from whole wheat atta or at least less refined atta, not from maida, and brown rice and any other whole grains. Among the dals or pulses or legumes, again, the unrefined ones, which have the seed coat intact, and of course, some fruits and vegetables. So these are the high fiber foods. And the cereals and pulses, their contribution is generally underestimated. People think fiber means plenty of fruits and vegetables. But the quantitative contribution of fruits and vegetables is limited. Firstly, because we don't take too much of them. Secondly, fruits and vegetables are essentially 90% water, 80 to 90% water, and therefore the scope for fiber or any other nutrient is very small. So for all practical purposes, they are desirable for various reasons, for vitamins and minerals, also for providing a certain category of fiber which has metabolic effects. For all that, fruits and vegetables are good, but then to really increase the quantity of fiber, one cannot forget the whole grains. Grains means both cereals and pulses. So the food may stay in the stomach for 4 hours, but we will leave it there for 2 days and then continue the journey of the food into the small intestine on Monday. Suggested reading the same popular book, The Human Machine, and textbooks, Fundamentals of Physiology and Understanding Medical Physiology. Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch, now that COVID is officially over in the WHO as well as in New Delhi, the ashram is open, the activities have been resumed, and you are all welcome here. For any questions or comments, apart from what you may ask now, you may send us an email on yes@yesspirituality.com. Gratitude to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo for making these sessions possible. And thank you all for being there.
There's one question in the chat box. How can yoga prevent acid reflux?
First, by making us more peaceful. And that is about the most important contribution it can make. I don't think there's really any specific asana or pranayama which by itself will help.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, please go ahead.
You mentioned the harm created by aspirin or the possible problems created by aspirin and compared that with with paracetamol. What doctors often prescribe is either paracetamol or Crocin or Dolo 650. Would you have any insights on which of these is better under what circumstances?
In general, these days considered that paracetamol is the safest. I don't know the composition of the other one that you mentioned. But then you may also ask that sometimes low-dose aspirin is prescribed for preventing heart disease. There the amount is so small that it does not generally lead to gastritis. It's a low-dose aspirin.
Thank you.
Because the question I saw, will there be another session on the gastrointestinal tract? Yes, there will be another session on Monday, where we'll continue the journey of food from the small intestine through the large intestine.
I had a question. Maybe this might be more relevant after the second session. I wanted to understand when we palpate the abdomen, what all, from a doctor standpoint, what all are we observing there? But
Yes,
maybe
good question. Yes. Firstly, the doctor tries to see whether the abdomen is soft, because when the person is relaxed and you relax the person by putting the person at ease, folding the legs, and then gently palpate the abdomen. So in that situation, a healthy person's abdomen is soft. Secondly, when you take it towards the lower most rim of the rib cage, and then ask the person to breathe slowly, then with each breath, as you know, while breathing in, the diaphragm comes down. So if the diaphragm comes down, the structures which are hiding under the rib cage will come down a little. And therefore, what can happen is that one may be just able to feel the rim of the liver on the right side or the spleen on the left side, but generally you do not feel them. And therefore, if you can feel the liver or the spleen, it means they are enlarged. So that is another thing that the doctor is trying to see, whether any of these is enlarged. And of course, in case of pregnant women, the person is also taking care of what may be felt in terms of the baby. Doctors not only palpate, they also auscultate. They put the finger like this and tap it like this. Normally, because there's a considerable amount of air in the abdomen, the sound is like you would get from a vessel containing air. Now, that is okay, but if they get sound which is as if something is a pot full of water, that different type of sound. So then, that suggests there's some water, and especially if it is more and not just on the sides, then, it may mean that the person is collecting fluid in the abdomen, which is called edema or ascites. So that is another thing that they can make out from percussion. And then they also put the stethoscope on the abdomen. And that is for listening to the bowel sounds, because the stomach moves, the intestines move, and therefore there are sounds. Absence of sounds is unhealthy, that is abnormal, because that in itself can lead to intestinal obstruction. Because you can imagine that obstruction is not only because something is blocking, something which should be moving, if it does not move, that also amounts to an obstruction. So symptoms can be like obstruction. So absence of sounds is abnormal. Presence of sounds up to a point is normal, but too much of sounds is also abnormal. Then it may mean that the capsule and the intestine is trying to push. So they can distinguish between the normal sounds and exaggerated sounds of increased movement or motility of the intestines. So these are some of the things that the doctors can know from an examination of the abdomen.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Anybody would like to ask anything?
And what's the link for the Sunday satsang?
The link for the Sunday satsang. I know Sunday satsangs, there's no link for the live session, but the satsangs are uploaded later on the YouTube channel of Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch.
Okay, so we cannot attend live, right?
No, you can attend. You can attend live in the ashram itself by visiting the ashram. At 10 in the morning. The satsang starts at 10 in the morning. It's over by 11:30 every Sunday without fail.
Okay, thank you.
All right, if there are no more questions, we can close today's session and we meet on Monday to continue exploring. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.